Hello everybody, my name is Stealth Lemon and you are watching Lemon Chat, which is a little bit more of an unscripted kind of show, video series. I don't know if I ever decide to do this more and more. I've had a couple of them that I've already recorded, but don't really plan on releasing just because they're either out of date or I just wasn't very happy with the final product. So if you're seeing this, then good job. This one was a specific request from the ideas and feedback channel on my Discord. You can go down below if you want some more Lemon Chats. But in any case, today we're going to be going through the DnD questions that there was a wired autocomplete, and it wasn't like an autocomplete interview. Sorry, I don't know my wired fact straight. It was like a D&D support that was held by Brendan Lee Mulligan, who I'm pretty familiar with, or at least I'm familiar with some more of the D&D type celebrities that do a lot of live shows. I usually would watch more things like Critical Role than like Dimension 20, but I've seen like his shorts and I've watched some of the Adventuring Academy series just so that I can kind of hear how other game masters play games like D&D. And so I'm pretty excited. When I saw the video, I kind of already knew what he was probably going to say for a lot of it, but I do have some things that I think that I could throw in. So I'm really going to go through, there's 30 of these questions, so I'm hoping that it's not going to take forever. Why don't we just go ahead and get started with the first question? You know, if you want to compare it to the original video, link it below. But I'm just going to go through all of them. Even if they're not relevant, I'm going to try to provide something useful. So here we go. What is the most iconic / famous D&D monster? Now, for me, I think that, really, I think there could be two of them. So whenever I think of D&D, I almost always think about beholders, or as the, mind flayers as one of the main antagonists. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially with how 5th edition has gone with how they're gonna kind of handle with Stranger Things. I understand. I still haven't really seen that show, but I know that that's one of the main reasons why 5th edition got really popular, was because of that show, and it kind of showed this really raw way of playing it, basically. So it wasn't just a bunch of nerds around a table, but no, it was actually fun and funny, and just a fun thing to do with a group of friends. I would probably have to go with the Beholder. Mimic is up there. I think that also the standard fantasy villains like goblins, orcs would also be kind of, maybe not necessarily tied to D&D, but definitely the fantasy genre. I think that most people associate D&D with high fantasy, so those can kind of be slotted in as well. All right, we got the next question here. Is there any secret? How do you come up with such great character designs and personality? And then there's some people who struggle making good characters. I think that if you're making a character for the first time, you shouldn't really see them as a bunch of rules. So some people who really want to play, maybe they want the best, race class combination. And I can certainly provide examples like that. But really, I think that what you want to start with is the concept. Maybe you want to make a character that's based on Harry Potter, for example. I think that if you have a general idea of it's Harry Potter, but he's learning how to cook, and so he needs to add things to his recipes, but he gets into some antics that way. I think that as a DM especially, I generally help people with character building more than I think usual. I kind of let them loose with the last campaign that I'm planning that will hopefully commence soon. Probably not. But it is what it is. I think that if you have a starting point and then you adapt the rules around the character, and then also not being afraid to kind of go off what is considered meta, if you are one of those kinds of players, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You just have to kind of admit that you're gonna have kind of a stereotypical character. I think that one of the most important parts about D&D is making a character you actually care about, or that you want to have like quests for and stuff like that. I think that as well, like giving them some sort of background. I mean, you can make it like, oh, well, they had like a completely normal childhood, and there has to be a reason for them to be called to adventure as well. So adventuring's not for everybody. There's not a bunch of people running around, you know, adventuring all the time. And so that can kind of make things hard for people too, especially like the cook example. Like, then why is he going to go around and he's going to defeat like monsters and bosses, right? So like maybe it's like, oh, his dad was a warrior, or like really wanted him to be a soldier, so he still learned, you know, how to fight and things like that. And so he's forced to go on these expeditions, but he still wants to, you know. So there's like examples there, I think, on how to make a good character, and then giving them like a defining like thing about them that can be referenced to, I think, is also important. All right, what is the greatest magic of all? The answer being friendship, right? So I think that it's interesting. I know that a lot of games or media in general, they want to have some sort of lesson tied to everything. And I think one of the easiest ones is like, if you care for one another, then like everything's going to be okay. Brennan kind of had a joke that it was like, well, it's really silly because there are a lot of people that probably died or got sacrificed or whatever. And so it's kind of messed up if it's like, oh, well, they just weren't like good enough friends with everybody and everything got fixed. I do think that like greatest magic of all in general would probably be better if it had some sort of like conduit or something where it was like, oh, you're special. Like only the chosen one could do XYZW. Because the game's ultimately about the players, and so it kind of makes sense if it's like, oh, well, there's something intrinsically special about you that makes it like kind of different. Not just like throwing in, oh, well, it's because you all became such good friends, even though you're all strangers or whatever. Like, it's kind of silly. He's kind of convicted, Brennan Lee Mulligan is, but I think part of that is just for the internet celebrity part of it. The next one is, so what are the stuff that you need to play Dungeons and Dragons? Do you need to buy separate sets and stuff? Do you make it yourself? So what's really funny is that I actually don't really have that many materials, at least I think compared to a lot of DMs. You need to know the rules, but I think that can easily be done on like YouTube, right? You got to have a character sheet of some sort. I think that like online resources are really great for that, because there are ways you can like automatically have things be calculated if you go to a site like D&D Beyond, or I even use like just an Excel spreadsheet. You can have things listed out that way, and that way you can also share with your DM so they kind of know like what you can do if you're absolutely brand new, which kind of sounds like this person is. The biggest thing in terms of in person is probably the starter set. If you and your group are entirely new, I think that the D&D starter set, it comes with like a 3-page adventure. It's good for like one session. It comes with like pre-made characters. It kind of tells you like what they can do and things like that. And I think that that's really important. Ultimately though, D&D is a game of improvisation. So having the actual rule books, while they are gonna be kind of helpful, and I think that they're also fun to look at and read, I also don't think it's necessary to play the game, and that's kind of why I think it's so popular, is because there's so many different ways you can play it. All right, the next one, what is the best representation of D&D in pop culture? And then with Stranger Things was cited as an example. I can't really say that I see a lot of D&D in pop culture, mainly because there's always like D&D takes a little from this, and then pop culture takes a little from D&D. I think the D&D movie is a great kind of example and a good like foray for people who are interested in the actual lore universe. Baldur's Gate 3 as well is a really great way to get into like the lore, or really just any of the Baldur's Gate series. Pathfinder as well is not necessarily tied to Wizards of the Coast anymore, but it's almost like they have their own system of lore. They have computer role-playing games like Baldur's Gate 3 as well that are a little bit more lore-intensive, and you do a bunch of other stuff. But other than that, I think that a lot of the actual lore, it's just so kind of spread out and sprinkled everywhere. So I think that that's really the best you're going to get, is probably things like Stranger Things, and then as well as whatever Wizards of the Coast is kind of got their stamp on. I'm DMing a game for a bit, and I'm trying to learn how to make female voice for an NPC, and I'm very bad at voices. Well, You know, it's funny. One of the things that my players said that they really like are my voices, specifically my Diane voice, which I still shudder because I think it is so bad. Ultimately, people don't really know what you're going for, and if they think it's funny, then that's part of the fun because you're playing a game. Now, if you want things to be a little bit more dramatic, I wouldn't recommend like not being like girly girl voice, but actually maybe using your normal voice or making your normal voice in like a slightly higher pitch tone, like kind of making your women a little bit more like the athletic kind of strong type, which might be pretty relevant. But I mean, if it's obviously like a princess of the land, you can kind of express things with actions rather than words as well. You can also just use like the third person, like the princess says that she's very thankful and gives you a smooch. So I think that that's it. But it is also funny if you like to do the funny voices. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that it's part of what your parent or what players really like about the game. Maybe your parents too. That's what I was going to say. All right. The next one we got are, can you tell me how D&D alignments work? Okay. So D&D alignments to me, there's 3 axes, right? I think the easier one to explain is probably lawful, neutral, and chaotic, right? If you're a lawful person, then that means that you respond very well to authority, which means that whether you're a good guy or a bad guy, you kind of respect the hierarchy and the chain of command, or if you don't, then you like want to be the one at the top of the hierarchy, basically. So if you're like a mafia boss would be like an evil lawful character, or even someone in the mafia would be like a lawful evil character because they kind of know their place in like a hierarchy. As you go more over towards chaotic, or more chaotic, then that means that you don't really see like any sort of order or structure like that. And you may still have morals and like what's right or wrong. Generally speaking, like I think of good and evil. Good is like if you are really living to help improve other people's lives, they're the people you care about anyway, versus evil is when you really don't care about improving other people's lives and you more care about like your self-interest. So it's a little bit more like selfish feelings, but ultimately alignment charts are nice because everyone just really likes categorizing themselves. So as much as I consider myself a neutral good person, maybe you disagree. Maybe comment down below of what your alignment is for engagement. All right, the next one we got is the difference between paladins and warlocks is one's got an employer and the other's got a sugar daddy, but like which one is which? So I think that it's kind of a funny joke. But really, honestly, any divine caster or caster that's considered divine, which would mainly be your clerics, your paladins, I'd even say your warlocks as well, they have their power from somebody else. Somebody else is bestowing them that power. So paladins, in a way, have got the employer because they have a duty and they're carrying out their god's duty, and they're giving them these powers so that they can do that better. Which is why if you're a paladin and you stray away from that duty, then your deity can get mad at you and can take away your powers, or you can become an oath breaker and like get all the cool anti-paladin stuff or whatever. But clerics, you know, have like rituals and things like that as well. That's a little bit more oriented, not necessarily for the duty of their god, but just the general worship and like spreading of their god's mission. Not just like, you know, being the soldier on the front lines. They're kind of like two cuts from the same cloth. Warlocks, though, they have a duty to a contract. And so generally it's just more like who is giving you those abilities. If you're a warlock, it's someone that's not really like a deity. So it's more like a devil or like a fae, like a fairy creature or Cthulhu or whatever. That's just, I guess it's kind of my comment there on that front. I think that it's important, though, when you are making those characters to try to establish a little bit, go a little bit deeper into like what that relationship is, because then there's some like cool story things you can do with that. Okay, why are wizards so squishy? Honestly, it's kind of like a glass cannon archetype is what I would say. Especially with the 2014 rules, wizards are famously one of the best classes in the game. They're one of the most versatile, and their weakness being their AC and their hit point is like the only thing that is keeping them in check in any capacity. It also makes them a target to be protected. It kind of incorporates like a team environment. So if wizards weren't squishy, then like the game just wouldn't be fun because everyone would be playing a wizard. Not saying that I think wizard's probably one of my favorite classes too, but we just want things to, you want it to be so that all the classes have like some strength or weakness. So it's just kind of how it has to be. Sorry. All right, next things is among things I don't know, and at this point I'm afraid to ask, how many sets of dice do D&D players have and why? So dice are cool. Let's start there. I would say when I was first playing D&D, when I was first wanting to get groups together, I bought a set of like 100. It was like a variety set of just 100 random like pieces of dice. Like they weren't even in sets. It was from like Wiz Dice or something like that. That got me through a whole lot because I think that with that deal on like Amazon, it was like, like $20 for it, which I just thought was really like a good deal. If you want to get like a complete set nowadays, go into like a game store, it's going to be more like $8. I think personally, eventually what I would want to do is if I ever got serious in playing a character as a DM, I feel like it's not like as like good. Maybe if it's for like a BBEG or a big bad evil guy. I think that's what that means. I don't want to embarrass myself with that. That maybe if I knew I was going to be playing like a character a lot, that I would want to get a kind of dice for like spells. So if I wanted to be like a fireball wielding wizard, I would maybe get 6d6s that looked like fire, so that way it could, and then it looks like fire everywhere, and it's just like, oh, it's cool, So I don't think that people have a lot of dice. Obviously, people online you're going to be seeing have dice, but again, it's just a really cool thing to collect, and they're generally inexpensive when you do. So people can kind of have a tendency to collect them. Should Dungeons and Dragons should Dungeon Masters stop fudging dice rolls? So ultimately, this is just a broader discussion about when you have a dice roll, because if you're gonna have a dice roll, then you need to expect that it's possible to fail that dice roll. Now, what I do sometimes is that if someone is very low on life, usually a DM will spare that person by, like fudging the roll, like maybe even you roll it out on the table, but you like fudge the like modifier. So it's like, oh, wow, that barely missed you. And it's like kind of a cooler moment. Again, ultimately, I think that that's what you're really going for. There is part of the game, though, is being transparent with the dice. So I generally don't fudge really at all, except for extremely rare circumstances. In fact, if I know a roll is going to be really important, like, he's gonna like mind wipe you and it's gonna kill you, I'm gonna roll it out in front of the table, and then it's either gonna be a big problem or it's gonna be like, whoo, finally, and like a sense of relief. So I think that open rolling is really good, but I also think that fudging has its place, because you don't want to die to like something really lame like a dog attack or something like that. All right, next one. What is a golden rule you try to follow for D&D or any other TTRPG? I always think that you're playing a game, so that means there has to be rules, and everybody is kind of subscribing to the rules, but I think that should be a really loose definition. So, rule of cool is usually what it's called. I think that the point of the game is to have fun and to have the players and the DM have a good time. So, obviously, if players are wanting to do something cool, but it seems completely unfeasible, like, oh, I'm gonna jump onto the dragon's head, I'm gonna stab it with a dagger, then I'm jump off the chandelier, and then I'm gonna do like a backflip into the air as I land and shoot an arrow in the air into its eyeball or something like that. And, it's very obvious that, like, you don't have action economy to do that. Maybe you find a way to break it up where instead of swinging on the chandelier, you land on the chandelier, and then you can kind of like make things like change like that. Well, again, ultimately it is a game. I still think that having rules is important because it should be possible to fail. People shouldn't just feel like there's no risk at all. But I definitely think that if somebody wants to do something cool, then the DM should absolutely be receptive to that, even if it isn't the final say of the player. It's not like customer's always right, you know? What is your favorite character race and class combo for D&D? Dwarf Cleric. I don't know why. I just feel like every time I like want to make a player character, it always seems to be a Dwarf Cleric. I just think that it's really funny to roleplay dwarves because you can be really stereotypical like dwarf. You can mention things about their height or how they like look different from everybody. And I think the clerics and divine casters in general, it's something that I'm interested in if I ever played. But I'm kind of a forever DM. I also have to give kudos to like elf rangers or elf rogues. I think that, you know, that's cool. I don't know what it is about it, but I just think that it's a cool class combo. There you go. How do you handle a TPK? Do you do a full reset or you just pick up the last save point? Well, it's not a video game, right? So you're not really going to be like, oh, you all died, restart at checkpoint question mark. So generally speaking, if there is an encounter that the player should really not be in, and there should be some of those, I think, where the solution or the best solution isn't to fight head on. Generally, a lot of players will try to like recognize that and avoid that situation if possible. But it's kind of just like giving subtle messages like, okay, so you're going to go into this fortress. You don't know how many people are in there, but you're going to go in there by yourself and with no invisibility or stealth whatsoever. And so that usually is kind of like the hint what makes them go like, oh, wait, or like somebody else will chime in maybe with like an idea, things like that. I know that there was one time in my campaign where there was a creature that they were not supposed to really face. And I basically made it so that the creature intimidated like the one person that was trying to egg it on. It was a dragon, by the way, like a big one. And so, I mean, ultimately I didn't railroad them into that solution, but I think that once they kind of realize that like, oh, it can like do this thing really easily and you can't do anything, then that probably means you shouldn't pick a fight with it. I don't know, right? So ultimately the real answer is before it happens. And then if not, again, one of the biggest things that a DM does is they're supposed to determine what happens in the world if the players do nothing. And then they're supposed to adapt with what the players are doing and how things change and how things, you know, get manipulated and who gets upset or whatever. So if there's a TPK, then I guess that means villain's plans go on as scheduled. But obviously, if you want to keep continue in that setting, and that means you just gotta either roll up new characters or you become like another adventuring party on the same task, whatever. Why do we always start games in a tavern? Well, I think that generally speaking, you want to have like a really nice public place where anyone can go in and out and you can meet and talk about a variety of things. So it's a little cliche. I've tried other ways of having the party get together, but honestly, it just feels really forced. I think at one point I had it so that way they were in a carriage and they were on their way as a part of like a security mission. But like one of the people was a drag queen, so it was like, who knows like why they would go, and you can kind of make different reasons or whatever. And I think that's also just an important reason why when you're making a character, you could also get inspiration from the DM. Obviously you can just kind of hand wave it and I think it's fine. But there should at least be like a teeny tiny reason. And taverns are also a great environment because there's a lot of things that can happen in a tavern. Like people can be smooching off in the corner and you can comment on it, or someone could, you know, start robbing the joint, or, you know, you can drink a bunch of mead or whatever. It's usually what happens. So does anyone have any tips for a first time DM? Well, first of all, the person who made this comment also referenced session 0. That would probably be the best one. It's kind of given a nice establishing guidelines. I also wouldn't start with a full-fledged campaign or like whatever project you want. I would have like a burner session where you just can kind of have a random adventure just for one day, or make something that could be contained in one single session, because honestly, a lot of the times when I wanted to start a campaign, it only really lasted for 1 or 2 sessions. and then things kind of fizzled out. It's just kind of how things work. So I wouldn't put in a whole lot of effort on that front. I would recommend, I think, Sly Flourish's Lazy Dungeon Master's Guide as a really good like piece of reading in terms of what you need to actually get through the game. And then if you really like a different part of the process, just make sure you own up to that, because that's like the fun part of DMing. If you really like making maps, then you can make the maps. If you really like making backgrounds for NPCs, then go ahead and make a bunch of NPC backgrounds. But ultimately, really what you need is you just need to find some scenes, find the ultimate like objective of everything, and then some like really cool environments, and you're pretty much there. So if you want to get all that from a pre-written book, or if you want to do that, you know, by yourself, just go ahead and go do it. It's a lot of trial and error being a DM, so, but it is a lot of fun. That is definitely for sure. What in the world is a critical role? Don't you mean a nat 20? So, I mean, technically speaking, when you roll a natural 20 in combat, you roll for double damage. Now, I mean, this is almost like funny. I think that they're trying to like dog on Critical Role, the show. It is a good show. I kind of had to stop watching it though, because they took like a big long break and I never got past, you know, like episode like 40 of season 3, and you know, now they finished up season 3 of like, I've got like 80 episodes to watch if I want to one day, and it was all right. It was pretty good. They, you know, they just started having a bunch of guests, and I was like, I don't really care about the guests because I know they're not going to be around for that long. But anyway, yes, when you do have a critical hit, you can do a couple of things. What I personally like to do is I like it to always be impactful to roll a natural 20 on a combat encounter. So instead of just double the die roll, I mean, sometimes rolling the dice is, you know, like really, really fun. But what I do is I do crunchy crits, which is basically you roll it still as the normal damage roll, but you already add the maximum damage dice on everything. And then just know that enemy monsters can crit you as well. So just keep that in mind. Question for Dungeon Masters. If D&D is improv with yes and with dice, what do you really do when the dice really don't want to tell the same story that you do? So if you want to tell a story, you have to kind of wonder if D&D is the right method to do that, because ultimately, with the dice rolls, the whole point of them is to provide a random chance. So it makes a little bit of a game out of storytelling. You shouldn't ask for a roll if you don't like the outcome, if the roll either succeeds or fails. So like, you know, if you want to offer a roll for the bard to try to ask the king to marry them or whatever, I don't know, then you need to figure out what's going to happen when they roll a 20. And I mean, that can be funny as a way of like, oh man, oh gosh, like I really hope I get, and then it's like natural 20. There's still some fun in that, but you also will need to establish the expectation with your players that like, it's yes and, but it's also no but. So if they succeed in a role that you didn't really want them to, then you would say like, well, no, you didn't get the king to marry him, but he does kind of find you cute, and so he's going to provide you an escort to your next, you know, location or something like that. And then also just making sure that, you know, that anytime you have a dice roll, again, if it's to open like a door and they get a nat 1, then it's not like you hit yourself with the door. Like sometimes it's funny, but sometimes it can be annoying. So I don't also want to punish people too badly for dice rolls. Like you take a whole bunch of damage. You just want to make sure that it's fair, and that if someone dies, it's because of many bad decisions, not just one. Okay, so the next one we have is, what's your favorite D&D 5e spell? It's gonna be a little bit weird. I would probably say Grease is my favorite. Fireball is like obviously really funny because it's such a big range and it's a lot of damage. Like it's a good amount. It's a really good spell. A lot of third level spells are actually like probably the best ones and like most powerful anyway. But I just really like Grease because I think you can be really creative with how it's used. It's just kind of funny when people like fall over, you know, all the time. Baldur's Gate 3 is like an interesting way of interpreting grease or ice in general, or like water, because they had the surfaces you can like have different spells interact with each other on that front. Obviously grease and fire is like really cool. But I just think that any funny moment I've had is from a low-level spell. I think that low-level D&D is probably my favorite up until like level 3 spells. So I'd only really like when my player characters only get up to like level 7 or 8. Because I think higher than that, things just kind of get a little bit more confusing then. This is a question specific to Brennan Lee Mulligan, but I'm going to answer it as if he was asking me. How does your prep for an adventure in somebody else's campaign differ from a preparation for whatever you're doing? Generally speaking, you want to make sure you provide some respect to that person's world. I think there was one time where I almost co-DM'd, or I helped the DM as like the assistant DM, but I was still a player. I really wanted to make sure that I had their input on things, and I really wanted to develop that world. And so when you're helping out a DM, generally speaking, you're kind of like the sounding board, and you like will ask the questions that maybe they didn't think of when they were thinking about their world building. So it's like, oh, well, you say that these people are the only ones allowed to use magic, but like what would happen if like somebody tried to sneak into the archives and they like got good enough, but they get caught in public that they were doing like the sacred arts or whatever? Like, what would you do then? I think that those are the kinds of things that you would want to do just to make sure you flesh out that other world as much as possible. So that's kind of a weird question, but I think that that's probably a good answer. Question for D&D and TTRPG friends. What is your favorite magic item? You know, it's really funny. I'm really bad about giving magic items out, actually. It's one of the things as a DM that I'm pretty bad at. Generally speaking, what I do with magic items is they're usually in the form of potions, but I make it so that way the potion is like just a description, and I'm pretty secretive about what the potion is. And I'm gonna be honest, sometimes I don't even know what the potion is until they say like, I have the bright green potion, and then I think like, oh, what would be, funny about that, or what would be an appropriate reward for that thing. And I also like can sometimes just make stuff up homebrew because of the potion. It's just like kind of temporary. If you want like an actual answer, I think that a bag of tricks is really funny. The immovable rod, I think, is filled with all sorts of antics. A bag of tricks is basically when you have a bag and you reach inside and you throw an object and then it like pops out like some creature. So that can be kind of funny too. But there's also one where you like sew off patches and it becomes like a actual real world item. And I think that just anything that can improve one of the 3 pillars of D&D, I think is a good item. So anything that's good in combat, anything good for exploration, or anything to kind of talk to somebody. Like if it's like a cloak of bellowing, which would always emit smoke, make you look cool in that way. I think that those are also funny to do, or mustache items or whatever. Okay, next up, what common D&D related behavior or quirk really grinds your gears? So, this person mentions like not calling things the right name. I honestly don't really care about that because I almost like it when you can differentiate yourself with a different name like that. What I don't like is when people do something and then say, well, that's what my character would do. So if you're like making like this standoffish, like asshole kind of character, and it's just like, oh, well, I wouldn't help out the old lady. Like it basically, you get presented an opportunity, and instead of even like doing the opposite of what you think like the DM would expect you to do, like you see the old lady who just got her purse stolen and you like kick the old lady, but like you don't even want to like do that, right? So I think that people that don't really take hooks very well, or is a pretty popular one, as well as just in general, like, I don't know. I think that it's just saying no to the adventure. It's just like not what I'm signing up for. It's like, oh, we need to go into the fortress. And it's one thing to be like, pretend scared, but you go anyway. But then it could be another thing where you just absolutely refuse to go in and you say like, I'm staying outside. I'm staying right here. So sometimes that's like a funny thing because eventually you do go in, but a lot of the time it can really make things drag too. So obviously not knowing what you want, sometimes it's inevitable that you're not going to know what you want to do on your turn, but sometimes that does get annoying as well. And when I'm online, unfortunately, I'm just kind of have to be that person. some people, I feel, people, when you say like, oh, the person says this, what do you all say back? And then like nobody responds. So that's another thing. It's a little bit more specific to online D&D. That's why I have a little bit more standoffish towards it nowadays. Next question is, what is your favorite weird niche bit of lore that isn't fully developed? I think this is D&D lore. I'm gonna be honest. I think that the weirdest part about D&D lore is the official Starjammer setting, which is basically like D&D in space, but it still has like some fantasy elements. So generally speaking, I think that there's one of these further ahead as well, is that I think D&D 5e is a good D20 system. And I think a lot of people really like the D20 system, but they default to D&D 5e, which is, you know, pretty much like a high fantasy setting, or that's the setting it's best in. When you start throwing in other settings like sci-fi, or modern stuff, and you still want to use like D&D 5e, I don't know. I think that you'd be better off trying to find another system. One of the best things about 5e is that people have homebrewed so much stuff for it, because it is definitively the most popular tabletop role-playing game. But there's just so many other games, and I really want to play some of those other games too with, you know, my friends, but ultimately we are where we are, and that's kind of where we're at. So I know this is about lore. Starjammer is weird. I don't think it's even necessarily like incomplete, but I just know that a lot of people don't know about Starjammer, like flying around in a spaceship, going through planets, whatever. Why did people think playing D&D was satanic? You're literally fighting Hellspawn half the time. Well, you know, that is a very interesting point, I would say. You'd think if you're fighting Hellspawn that that's good, but ultimately what it is it's all about exposure to witchy stuff and the occult in general. I know that, you know, a couple of campaigns famously, you use tarot cards in order to determine like what your character's paths are, and things like that, which I think is really cool. But just in general, things that have like on the cover, it's like a demon. Like that was something that was really popular, I think, in the late 80s and early 90s when parents and, you know, started caring a lot more about that stuff. But I'm glad that nowadays, you know, D&D is a little bit more of a kind of respected, not really respected, but like not seen as a way into the Antichrist, if you will. All right, again, so this is, again, specifically for Brennan, but it's for me now. How much prep a DM like me does. Like what do his notes look like? So in general, what I do when I am prepping my D&D game is, if I'm not running off a book, I will basically ask myself, what is the main goal of the campaign? What is the like 5 things about that campaign that make it a unique campaign, like different from Joe Schmo's over theirs? And then what are like the good guys, bad guys, in between guys, right? Like you should have like a really good guy, really bad guy, and then maybe some people in the middle, like some mercenaries you can hire but are mainly bad, but sometimes are morally gray, you know, the good guys that are maybe a little too harsh, you know, so you can come up with those kinds of factions like that as well. I make sure I have a description of those, as well as to like how the party would interact with them. But really all what it is about is like you come up, I like to think of maps. So I really like building maps in D&D. I use Dungeon Draft to do that. I think it's really cool. I basically think about what's going to be happening in each map and which map you can go to. And if you're in between 2 different maps, then that's fine. But ultimately, you know, at least if you're going to stay within plans of the DM, you're going to be using those maps or a poster board, which, you know, when I'm in person instead of a digital map. So I usually think that the maps is like the main thing that I prep. And then a lot of the things are improvised, and you kind of want to get to like a point, like you want to think about a point where they're at. So it's like, okay, well, today they're going to be going to the fortress, which maybe you'll spend the first hour doing that, and you might throw in like a wild encounter just to make sure like they feel like they're actually going somewhere because they're spending time. And then you say, okay, well then like this is the entrance and this is what happens when they enter, because really the only thing you can control in a D&D session is how it starts. So generally speaking, you want to start out really strong, so planning that as well, and then just kind of seeing everything how it cascades as well would be what I do in order to prep. How many different editions of D&D do I actively play? I guess I'm gonna change this question a little bit because I don't play a whole lot of D&D right now, and it's your fault. Anyway, so I play mainly D&D 5e, so that's kind of like the main way that I play if I'm ever gonna like think about it. I do play in a regular Pathfinder game as well. That's Pathfinder, I think 2.5e, where we're basically in like a survival situation. It's a pre-written adventure by Paizo. It's pretty fun. I have played previously Starfinder. I've also played Shadowrun, and I really like those in terms of the sci-fi things. I think that in general, a sci-fi setting is better for a D6 pool system rather than a D20 system. So I'm really interested in getting my group to play something like that again. But for now, you know, it's okay to play what you're comfortable with, ultimately. Next question. D&D players, how do we feel about the new D&D rules mechanics? So this is specifically what I was asked to respond to. Basically, like, where we're at is it's like a balance patch, right? The 2024 5th edition rule set is a balance patch for the game. Generally speaking, something will need to be balanced, even if it's a PvE game, if there's no real reason why you wouldn't pick something. The biggest problems I would probably think of would be counterspell. Like if you didn't pick counterspell and you were at those higher level adventures, then you could really just cause a lot more trouble, and people would actually, like, your table mates would generally like be mad at you if they knew better, right? So I also know that the actual feelings for people in terms of how the D&D rules changed in 2024 was surrounding a lot of things with the SRD. So what that is it's the open source version of the rules that anyone can have access to, and you can play D&D however you want to. Wizards of the Coast, who makes and runs D&D, specifically, like, did a lot of really shady things with the new edition, and a lot of people did not like it. And that probably came, you know, from higher up, from what the people who actually really care about the game. But overall, the new rules kind of just added a bunch of like different subclasses. That's cool. They reworked backgrounds so that they're a little bit more relevant. I think that those rules are generally pretty well. You have feats as well that come from backgrounds. You have weapon masteries that you can go through. Ultimately, to me, it feels like a new edition of the game. I don't really know why we're calling them like the new rules. I like the rules that they made for bastions, and that you can play as an orc. I think that that is totally fine. But ultimately, I think that it's something that I will probably adopt eventually, but I'm not about to go out and buy the new rulebook. So I'm going to probably still stick with the 2014 rules. I honestly want to almost switch to Pathfinder rules just in general, because I'm kind of at the point where the ease of use for 5e is starting to become a little bit more limiting rather than the rules that are in Pathfinder. It's a little bit crunchier, but honestly, I don't think it's that bad. It just means that you might have to think about a couple of things with like calculations. It's more difficult, but I think it's a little bit more hardcore. So that's kind of where we're at. I think that the new rules is almost like a publicity stunt, if I'm being honest, because they made, I think, almost bigger changes to the 2014 game in the other rule books, like in Xanathar's or in Tasha's. They changed a lot of things in those rules too. But I think that having like species like being defined. I don't really know. I almost would want to call it 6E, but at this point, it's almost like it's become a live service model, is almost what it feels like. Okay, but what if I said I wanted to play a Wild West setting D&D campaign? Okay, so again, like, you can, like, add a gun to, like, your D&D game. In fact, I really like Pathfinder's role for guns. Guns are very powerful. They don't really, they suffer like a range increment in terms of things like accuracy and not damage, but like they do, you know, a lot of damage. You can do a lot of different attacks with, you know, a gun, for example. But if you roll a certain number on your gun, then it's going to misfire. And I think that that just kind of makes sense with how it would work, you know, like back in the day, right? If there's like a 5% chance you pull the trigger and it just doesn't work, right? And then if you'll have to like spend a whole round to like clear it out, and it becomes this cumbersome, useless thing now that you have, versus like a bow and arrow is not going to like misfire ever, right? And the difference in damage types is like a little bit marginal, but like, yeah, like bullets are nice because they're both blunt and they're piercing. So they work kind of from both ways versus, you know, an arrow is just piercing. But I mean, really, again, like I'm talking about Pathfinder here. Like, what am I going to do with 5e about guns? Like, can I do that? I mean, sure, but at that point, you're really like having different rules for it. And you just kind of have to wonder if 5e is the best way to do it. I'm not necessarily saying it's bad. I just think that 5e specifically, you have to think like this is the same game where you have like arcana checks and religion checks. So like, wow, are those going to be used in your Wild West game? You know, like, who knows? So it's like, I just think that once your setting starts to impede on some of the pre-built things that are universal, maybe it's time to think about another system. All right, I got only a couple more. So there's a Dungeons and Drag Queen show you're just finding out about? Yes, so there are a lot of different things. If you like D&D, shows online. You got like Arcane Arcade by XP Level 3. He's a really good YouTuber as well. Critical Role is great. This is talking about, I think, a Dimension 20 show. Again, I don't watch a whole lot of Dimension 20. Just, there's a whole lot of mediums and a whole lot of like memes. There's like D&D TikTok. You know, you got Ginny D. Just to kind of name a few, there's like all sorts of people that are providing their opinions, because ultimately it's a very different experience, because your experience is really tied to like your group and your style and how you guys like to play the game. So if you really want a dark, gritty realism game, you can be like Professor Dungeon Master, who makes videos about how to make it so that like, oh yeah, you can create like character mills that just kill all the characters, because like that's kind of fun, and that's how things were played back in the day. And I think that there is some like truth to that, and that all like nowadays, you know, characters are too powerful, they're really special, it's a lot different, and it's just somebody's opinion, you know. I think it's important to just kind of get as many different perspectives as possible, both in D&D, I guess, real life too, and just enjoy it. You know, there's a lot of stuff. So definitely go out and enjoy your D and Drag Queen show. The last one we have is a D&D question. He doesn't know how to answer. What does a mimic look like when he's not mimicking? So just in general, any sort of monster that doesn't have a, you know, they are generally in like a permanently disguised form. You have to think that they'd have a preferred disguise that is almost like permanent, and like that's kind of their true form, right? But obviously, if you're like a baby or whatever, like you got to look like something. So generally speaking, things that can change form or change their appearance, if it's something like polymorph, then really it can be whatever. It can be like a big ball of goo, but I think that it's basically like a translucent gray indistinguished blob, almost like what you would think of as like Ditto, is probably what I would say. Maybe not like as oozy, like you have to like pound it, because ultimately I think of like a mimic as something that could also change its texture and like shape. So, you know, it's got to be able to turn into like soft or hard. So I think it's almost like buttery. It's a weird question. I think that Brennan said basically like the same thing, that it's like this sort of like miracle material that can kind of turn into whatever it wants. But again, like once they're disguised, like they're sitting there waiting for something to eat. So you're probably not going to see one without its disguise at all, which is probably why it's not really ever explicit. We're done. We got through 30 things. The video is pretty long, but I hope that you liked it. Me ranting, it was a lot of fun. If you have any other suggestions for ranty things, again, some of the things that I wanted to make videos about was like the Nintendo Switch 2 launch, or my opinions on the Call of Duty games. Again, I just wasn't super ever satisfied with that or making a video about it. But if you're seeing this one, then that means that I made it, probably because you gave me a suggestion to do it. So go ahead in that Discord channel or in the comments down below. You can let me know like what else you want to see from this channel. I do still like making videos. I've just gotten a lot busier recently, and so if I'm not really feeling it, I'm not gonna like slug it out. Because even like December and Christmas time when I was making my advent calendar, like I didn't have a whole lot going on, so I could still just kind of slug through it and stay committed to that. Make sure you like the video if you haven't already. You probably did when you first started watching, in which case, great job. Leave a comment and subscribe if you want to see these pop up in your feed. Otherwise, it'll just kind of sit in your up next whenever I upload again, because that's kind of how YouTube is now. Okay, I will see you eventually. Bye-bye.